Hello everyone and welcome back to our final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and it should be a good one because we're talking about the last game of the weekend in the NFL, Sunday Night Football, and it's a really fun matchup. We talked about it a little bit throughout the show, but we're going to touch on it a little bit more. Eagles-Rams. This one to me is really about two powerful teams who find themselves in really contrasting circumstances. Let's start with the Eagles here because we talk about them a little bit in a positive light in terms of how they match up against the NFC's best, perhaps the second best team, or even 1A if you want to go that far, to the Detroit Lions, just because of all the talent they have and what we've seen from them these past couple of weeks really rounding into form. Splashbro says, love the over at 48.5. I do too. I really think this game is going to be a treat to watch on Sunday night. But talking more about the Eagles, I feel like where their big caveat is in terms of play calling. A lot of skepticism surrounding Nick Sirianni's role as a play caller in this team. But if you have guys like Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, chances are play calling can go out the window because these players are talented enough to do it on their own, and that's what I believe they'll continue to do. I feel like this team is just so good at acquiring talent and building it up to the point where they are a premier contender in the NFC. We're going to have to see if it's going to be enough to take down the Lions potentially in the future. But I feel that this Eagles team is in a really good spot. And this game could be an impressive win for them. But on the other side, you have the Rams who, for all intents and purposes, could be in a similar position to the Eagles had, an injury crisis early in the season not befallen them. But now, everyone's back, everyone's healthy, and not for nothing, their defense is starting to round in to its own. As Splash Bro says, Rams an oddball squad, exceptional tools on the offensive side, but defense is hard to figure out. I kind of agree, but this defense has proven to me in the past 3 weeks that it's truly matured. Yes, it's a lot of youth, a lot of players who have to replace generational talents like Aaron Donald up front, but it is starting to become more than the sum of its parts. And it's really been able to complement, like you said, this exceptional offense to a T these past couple of weeks. And that's what's really keeping them in playoff contention. But I do think that when I think about the Rams, I just feel like the pressure of the NFC West might get to them, funnily enough. Because the fact that every team in that division thinks they can potentially win it is going to put a lot of pressure onto the Rams to win games like this, because it's just going to be important NFC West matchups that you want to win on the stretch if you're the Rams that you can't ignore, but you also can't ignore games like this because you want to prove that your team fully healthy can compete in the NFC should you win the NFC West. Because looking at the Rams' schedule, they have some very tough games. After the Eagles, they have a game against the Saints that could be a weird one. Then they play the Bills, the 49ers, two very tough games, one very important divisional game. They play the Jets, then they play the Cardinals and Seahawks to conclude. Two games that if they lose, they're definitely out of the NFC West playoff picture and potentially out of the playoffs entirely. So this is not an easy schedule going forward for the Rams. Whereas the Eagles, they're playing with house money there. They really don't care who they're playing right now. That's how good they feel. They feel so confident that they really can beat anyone. But on paper, this matchup is pretty even. And I feel like momentum can swing to the Rams just because I believe this is a home game, but not just because of that. I feel like this Rams team is going to prove that when you're well-rounded, when you have the tools like Splash Bros alluded to on the opposite side of the football, with the defense growing into its own, you're going to be tough to beat. Because this Eagles team, yes, they have so many weapons to account for. Yes, Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley's improvisational skills are top tier. Yes, no matter who's calling the shots there, they are still an elite team. But the Rams are just one of those teams that can sneak up on you any given week and prove to you their worth. Yes, they have a couple shocking losses, much like the Dolphins won a couple weeks ago, but they've proven that they're a really solid complementary football team when they're on and when all the pieces are together and fit together. So it's really going to be a weird game because both of these squads are capable of being premier NFC teams. But I feel like when I look at it, the Eagles just feel like the team that's coming into this one more confident in themselves. Just because with all the noise that people are trying to generate about how offensive play calling can come back to hurt them, it hasn't. And they've just steadily improved ever since those comments were made. And on the Rams side of things, they are still, in many ways, as Splash Bruce called them, an oddball squad. Can this defense maintain this consistency they found over these past couple of weeks? Is the offense really as good as we think? So there's so many questions surrounding the Rams that don't necessarily seem to be there for the Eagles or have already been answered by the Eagles to prove to me that they should be the favorite in this one. And so from betting perspective, much like we went over when I picked the Eagles in my segment a couple segments ago, I feel like this betting could be even more uneven than it actually is. Because as much as I respect the Rams, and I have faith that they potentially can win this football game, the Eagles to me are just a team that is playing with fire right now. And not necessarily in a bad way. They're playing with fire in a good way because everyone's clicking. They're firing on all cylinders no matter what. As Splashworth does say, though, they are benefiting from an easy schedule now and going forward. Who have they beaten? Well, they have beaten the teams in front of them. That's my answer. And the Commanders as well, Yeah, they're proving that potentially they're not necessarily the potent team that you thought they were after their shocking run to start the season, but they're still an elite team. And so, if I'm a bettor and I'm looking at this game and thinking about the Eagles' schedule, I would say that even though they haven't had a signature win, they're still a team that beats the teams in front of them. It's not their problem. They're in the NFC East. But if you continue to beat up on the teams in front of you, you are a good football team, no matter what. Whereas the Rams, there's just been too many inconsistencies in their game. Yes, early in the season, you could chalk it up to injuries, but now, even when they're winning, I still have questions about them. I point to the Seattle game, perhaps, for the Rams. It's a weird game where, as Splash says, Packers their best win in week 1. Yeah, but that was a weird one in Brazil where both teams were not playing in the best of conditions and they had to rely on big plays. It was more about who scored more points rather than, two teams going at it as in a tactical chess match kind of thing. But let's go back to the Rams here because even in their wins, I don't necessarily think the Rams have proven to me that they've figured everything out. Because I point to this game against Seattle, right? They should have won that game a little bit more handily. Seattle let them stick around. But I think that in that one, we saw that they can play complementary football, but it's not necessarily enough to win games handily or beat up on who you should beat up on in certain games. And that's why the NFC West is as crowded as it is, because of the fact that teams you expect to have gotten off to good starts, like the Rams and 49ers, even healthily, because they haven't been healthy, but even healthy when they have most of their pieces there, haven't been winning, have either been losing or not winning convincingly enough. And so that's why I feel like right now, as much as we can talk about the Eagles' strength of schedule, it's not an issue for me because they have been impressive for what they've been doing. And Colin Cowherd has a phrase here about when people bring up easy schedule strength. They're beating NFL teams, and that's enough to make you a team that is potent in the NFL these days. If you beat up on who you should beat up on, you're still a good football team no matter what people say about you. So that's why I feel like the Eagles should win this game and potentially cement themselves as the primary contender to take down the Lions in the NFC. It potentially could be their toughest game on their schedule remaining, but it is one of those games where you kind of feel like if they don't look good, then you might have worry seep in. But I still think they have enough because the Rams, they're an oddball squad, as Splash Bros said. And I don't know whether week in, week out, they're going to maintain the status as a complimentary football team for much longer. I have faith that they can pull out certain games down the stretch, but I don't know if they'll be ones to get them into the playoff race because they are where they are right now because of certain circumstances. And unless they figure out what circumstances fit for them, then they're not really. As Blackpool says, playoffs are a different ballgame. No softies there. I still think the Eagles will have a shot. I feel like, the NFC is just too weird for the Eagles to not get an opportunity to have an easy strength of schedule even in the postseason. Because no team outside of the Lions has really separated themselves. Maybe the Cardinals could be a surprise team, but no one outside of the Lions has truly been elite this season. So, who knows what the playoffs will bring, but this game could be an amuse-bouche for that in terms of these two teams. But let me know what you think about this game in the comments because that will just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Chris Shepard. We'll be back to conclude the week here on the show at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. But other than that, I'm out. Like, follow, and subscribe. Let's have another great show tomorrow.